I still remember the first time someone called me gifted. It wasn't meant as a compliment, but as a warning. On the morning of my 6th birthday, they came for me. Imperial agents in red hoods arrived, carrying strange devices that hummed with a noise sharp enough to make my ears ache. My mother wouldn't even look at me as they locked cold iron cuffs around my wrists. Her eyes stayed on the floor, as if the boy she had raised was gone, replaced by something unclean, something dangerous pretending to be human. I wasn't the only child taken. That morning, 12 of us were pulled from our homes, all marked with what the Imperium calls the witch mark, a sign of the cursed, the feared, the useful. We were led through streets heavy with incense and hymn singing. People stepped aside without a word, careful not to look at us. But I felt their fear and their relief that it wasn't their children being dragged away. We were loaded onto a black ship, covered in symbols that made my eyes burn if I stared too long. The inside smelled of antiseptic and scorched hair. "You belong to the Emperor now," said the woman who processed us. Her voice was flat and cold, like space itself. "Your old life is over. Your name no longer matters. You are now Payker Designate MX 379. Her mechanical eyes clicked as she studied me. "Delta-level potential," she muttered. "Strong enough to be useful, not strong enough for immediate termination." I didn't know what she meant then, but I would learn soon enough. The journey felt endless, a blur of darkness and whispered voices. The iron chains cut deeper into my wrists every day, but without them, the voices would come. Voices that spoke in sounds no human could make. They promised power, freedom, pleasures beyond imagining. They lied. When we finally reached the Scholastia Sicana on Terra, I had already forgotten what sunlight looked like. A sanctioned psyker greeted us at the landing chamber. He had no eyes, only smooth skin where they should have been. Yet I felt his gaze weighing each of us, measuring which would break first. "Most of you will not survive the first year," he said without introduction. "Those who do may wish you hadn't. But know this. Your suffering protects humanity. Your pain shields the Emperor's realm. Your sacrifice will not be remembered, but without it, mankind would burn in fire and madness." At the time, it sounded like a bad bargain. 15 years later, I know it was the only one we had. The Scholastia Sicana was not a school. It was a prison, a laboratory, a slaughterhouse, and a temple all at once. Its blackstone corridors swallowed light and sound. Screams and prayers echoed as one. The walls were covered in wards that burned anyone with the gift to see them. On my first night, they locked me in a cell barely big enough to lie down. The walls were lined with special copper that bounced my thoughts back at me, twisted and loud. I could hear the other children crying from their own tiny cells. 3 of them died before morning, their minds destroyed by the weight of their own terror. The overseers called it necessary attrition. We started each day with the prayer of containment. 300 verses on our knees, foreheads against cold stone. "I am the vessel, not the content. I am the channel, not the power. I am the servant, never the master." Over and over, until the words became meaningless vibrations in our bones. Breakfast was tasteless paste laced with drugs to dull hunger and emotions. A mercy, really, considering what came after. Our mornings were for control drills. We sat in circles, iron collars chaining us to the floor while instructors placed objects before us: a feather, a cup of water, a candle. "Move it," they ordered, "but don't burn it. Don't freeze it. Don't change it." It sounded simple. It wasn't. The human mind isn't meant to touch the world directly. Nature built walls to keep thought and reality separate. When a psyker reaches out, those walls crack. And through those cracks, things look back. Hungry, patient things. My first attempt to move the feather ended with it bursting into green flames. The fire spread across the floor in shapes that twisted into screaming faces. 2 instructors died trying to contain the fire I'd unleashed. Afterward, they locked me alone in a cell for a week. A null collar cranked to its maximum, setting crushing my thoughts until it felt like my skull was being squeezed in a vice. When I was finally released, the eyeless instructor only said, "A poor performance, but instructive for the others. Try again." And so it went, day after day, attempt after attempt. Each mistake was punished more harshly than the last. Each success earned me nothing but an even harder task. By the end of the first year, only 4 of us were left from the original 12. I had learned to move the feather. I had learned to light the candle. I had learned to freeze the water without shattering the cup. But I had also learned what happens when control slips. Eric was the first of us to awaken telepathic abilities. He could skim the surface of other people's thoughts, a skill that made the instructors take special interest in him. I envied him. Until the morning I woke to find him standing over my bed, blood running from his eyes and ears. "They won't stop talking," he whispered. "Everyone, everything. Even the stones are screaming." His mind had opened too far, too fast. He wasn't just hearing our instructors anymore. He was hearing every living being in the facility, thousands of minds at once, crashing into his own without barrier or filter. They didn't execute him. That would have been merciful. Instead, they took him to the demonstration chamber, gathering the senior students to watch the price of failure. They removed his collar and restraints and simply waited. It took less than a minute. His eyes rolled back. His body twisted unnaturally. His skin rippled as though something inside was trying to claw its way out. Then he spoke, but the voice wasn't his. Such despair, such exquisite pain. A feast laid out just for me. I won't describe what happened next. Some horrors carry their own power just by being spoken. I will only say that when it was over, after the sanctioned psychers and the Sister of Silence did their work, nothing was left of Eric but a smear on the floor and a psychic echo that haunted our dreams for days. "This is failure," the eyeless instructor said calmly. "Return to your training." And we did. The second year brought new lessons. We weren't just learning control anymore. We were learning to weaponize our powers, to focus energy into destructive forms, to look beyond the veil between worlds but never touch it, to reach into minds not just to read them, but to break them. These lessons came from members of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, veterans of 1,000 battles whose bodies bore the cost of their service. Many were blind, their eyes burned out by the power they had channeled. Others were missing limbs, not from enemy fire, but cut away after warp corruption crept into their flesh. They were hard people, hollowed out by experience. Speaking of their gift, the way one might speak of a terminal disease, with grim pride and resignation. "You will suffer," said Instructor Kane, a rail-thin man with silver studs along his jawline. "You will die, probably in pain, probably in fear. But before that happens, you will serve. You will be the eyes of the fleet, the voice that carries orders across the void, the fire that burns the heretic and the mutant. You will be the weapon of weapons." Kane taught us biomancy, the manipulation of living tissue. Under his instruction, we learned to speed healing, stop blood flow, and force the heart muscle to seize. We practiced first on servitors, then on condemned prisoners. The first time I stopped a human heart, I vomited for hours. By the 20th time, I felt nothing at all. Instructor Vale handled our pyrokinesis training. She had no lower jaw, only a mechanical device that clicked and hissed when she spoke. "Fire," she explained, "is the purest expression of a psyker's art. Direct, undeniable, cleansing. The flames you summon are not metaphorical, but they are not entirely natural either. They burn with your will, your faith, your hatred. They are an extension of your soul. Use them carelessly, and it is your soul that will be consumed." We learned to summon fire from nothing, to shape it, direct it, and keep its hunger under control. Our training rooms were lined with fireproof ceramite, and we wore heavy flame-retardant robes. Yet by the end of every session, our skin was still marked with burns. But the hardest lessons, the ones that took the most lives, weren't about fire. They were about opening the mind, divination, and telepathy. To look into the future or into another's. Thoughts meant creating a doorway through which dark things could flow both ways. Instructor Heimelen, a blind woman whose scarred face barely looked human, drilled us on mental defenses. She taught us to build walls inside our minds, to keep our thoughts our own. "The voices will never stop," she warned. "They'll whisper to you when you sleep. They'll scream at you when you're weak. They'll promise power, knowledge, and freedom from pain. They'll sound reasonable. They'll sound kind." She leaned so close her ruined face was inches from mine. "They're lying. Always. Forever. There is no deal you can make with the warp that won't destroy you and everything you touch. Remember that when the voices sound sweetest." I remembered. I still do. Even now, as I write these words with trembling hands, I can hear them. Patient, persistent, promising relief from the crushing weight of existence. I don't listen. I recite my litanies. I tighten my null collar until my vision blurs. I cut aversion wards into my palms with the edge of my stylus, using the pain to anchor myself in reality. It's never enough, but it has to be. By the third year, we were split into specializations. Those who showed talent in certain areas were separated for focused training. I was placed with the augurs, the ones who could peer through time and space, who could see what was hidden, who could glimpse what was coming. It was supposed to be an honor. It felt like a death sentence. Divination is perhaps the most dangerous of all sanctioned psyker arts. To see truly, you must open the mind's eye fully, and what you see cannot be unseen. The currents of fate, the tangled threads of possibility, the horrors waiting in potential futures, all of it floods the unprotected mind, cutting channels that never heal. Our teacher was a woman named Sybil, so ancient she had to be, carried into our training chamber on a palanquin by servitors. Her skin was thin and translucent, blue veins showing like rivers on a map. Her eyes were white, unblinking orbs. "You think you know fear," she said in a surprisingly strong voice. "You haven't even begun. To see the future is to see the end of all things. To know, with certainty, that entropy claims everything, that the stars themselves will one day go dark." She smiled then, revealing teeth filed to sharp points. "And yet we look, because to be blind is worse. To stumble forward in ignorance invites disaster not only for ourselves, but for all humanity." We began with simple exercises, reading sealed messages, locating hidden objects, describing rooms we had never entered. Each success led to harder tests, predicting the outcomes of random events, identifying infiltrators among loyal citizens, seeing through the eyes of animals, then servitors, then willing humans. The strain was immense. 2 of my fellow augurs died of brain hemorrhages during particularly difficult viewings. Another clawed out her own eyes after witnessing something she refused to describe. 4 more were executed for signs of warped taint, their ashes scattered into the void. I survived by being careful. I never opened my mind's eye too wide. I looked at reflections instead of staring directly at what I wanted to see. It made me slower than some of the others, but it also kept me sane, mostly. The nightmares still came. Unbidden visions haunted my nights. Hive cities burning under skies ripped open to reveal swirling madness. Fleets of living ships devouring worlds. Humanity's extinction unfolding in 1,000 variations, each more horrific than the last. These are not necessarily prophecies, Sybil told me when I finally confessed the visions. They're possibilities, fragments of potential futures. Or perhaps they're just your own fears, shaped by your gift and given form. She didn't sound convinced by her own words. "Write them down," she ordered. "All of them. Every detail." She wanted every nightmare cataloged, every glimpse recorded. I did as I was told, filling slate after slate with descriptions of horrors that left me sleepless for days. Grim-faced adepts collected the slates without speaking or even meeting my eyes. I never learned what happened to those records. Maybe they were filed away in some vast Imperial archive. Maybe they were compared to the dreams of 1,000 other psychers, searching for a pattern that hinted at true prophecy. Or maybe they were destroyed outright, judged too disturbing or too hopeless to be of use. What I do know is that after 6 months of this, they told me I was ready for the next stage of my training, combat. The shift was sudden. One day, I was in the quiet gloom of the divination chambers, peering into time and possibility. The next, I was standing in a cavernous hangar aboard a warship, surrounded by soldiers of the Imperial Guard. They gave me a wide berth, as though standing too close might burn them. Our new instructor wasn't a psyker at all, but a commissar, a political officer, whose job was to enforce discipline, even if it meant execution. His name was Tannhauser. He looked at us the way a person might look at a weapon that could explode in their hands. "You are no longer students," he said, pacing in front of us with his hands clasped behind his back. "You are assets, Imperial resources to be deployed as needed. Your training now will focus on battlefield use of your abilities, coordination with regular forces, and survival under fire." He stopped, scanning our faces with cold, pale eyes. "Some of you may think finishing your training means greater freedom. It does not. You will be watched more closely than ever. Battlefields are chaotic, stressful, unpredictable, exactly the kind of environment that leads to warp contamination. The first sign of corruption will mean immediate execution. For your own good. For the safety of everyone else. He drew his bolt pistol and held it up for us to see. I carry sanctified ammunition at all times. A round for each of you. Consider it my sacred duty and my solemn promise. The message was clear. We were not soldiers. We weren't even people. We were weapons, to be aimed, fired, and discarded. Combat training was nothing like what had come before. The focus wasn't on honing our abilities, but on using them under pressure, alongside regular troops, and within strict limits. We ran drills and mock cities, flushing out hidden targets for guard units to engage. We practiced battlefield divination, predicting ambushes and enemy movements. We learned to build psychic barriers to protect advancing soldiers, to jam enemy communications, to spread confusion and terror through opposing forces. And we learned to kill, not the controlled, clinical executions of condemned prisoners we had practiced before, but mass slaughter. We unleashed psychic energy powerful enough to liquefy dozens of targets at once, ignite the air in their lungs, burst every blood vessel in their bodies. At first, the targets were servitors. Then came captured heretics and mutants too dangerous or corrupted for redemption. They died screaming, their bodies warped by the forces we channeled. The smell was indescribable. The sound was worse. I vomited after the first exercise. The commissar only watched, expressionless. "Get used to it," he said. "This is your purpose now." For more weeks of training. Then deployment. I was assigned to the 117th Cadian Regiment, a famed unit currently, suppressing a heretical uprising on the mining world of Calibrax. My designation was now sanctioned Payker Theta 117, attached to Bravo, company under the command of Captain Lorik, a veteran of 3 campaigns. His scarred face and crude augmetic arm testament to the cost of war. He met me with undisguised suspicion. "I've worked with your kind before," he said during our first briefing. "I know your capabilities and your limitations. You will follow my orders exactly. You will not use your powers without explicit authorization, and you will remain under guard at all times." Captain Lorik leaned forward, his metal hand scraping against the surface of his desk. "The men already think this mission is cursed," he said. "A warp storm delayed our arrival, our supply lines are cut, and the enemy is far stronger than our reports suggested. Morale is bad enough. Having a witch among them won't help. Keep your head down, do your job, and try not to get anyone killed, including yourself." My quarters turned out to be an old storage room, converted into a cell barely big enough for a cot and a tiny shrine to the Emperor. 2 guards stood outside, at all times, part protection for me from the regiment's superstition, part protection for them from anything I might accidentally unleash. I spent the first 3 days alone, poring over tactical data and intelligence reports, trying to build a mental picture of the battlefield. The rebellion on Calibrax had begun 6 months earlier after the discovery of strange relics deep in the mines. What had started as scattered incidents of madness had grown into full-scale war. Nearly half the planet was now in open revolt. The reports were dry and clinical, listing atrocities in neat paragraphs, ritual sacrifices, flesh crafting. Entire blocks of housing turned into blood-soaked shrines. But between the lines, I could feel the fear. This wasn't just politics or poverty. This was something darker. Chaos worship. On the 4th day, I was summoned to the command center for my first task. Captain Lorik stood in front of a glowing map of a mining complex called Epsilon 9, surrounded by his senior officers. None of them looked at me as I entered. "Payker," Lorik said, skipping any formality. "We're planning an assault on this facility. Intelligence suggests it's a rebel stronghold, maybe even their local command post. Before we move, I need to know what's inside." I understood immediately. He wanted a psychic reading of the site, a look behind the walls. "I'll need a focus object," I said. "Something from the location or from someone who's been there." Lorik nodded to an aide, who produced a small metal box. Inside was a rough piece of ore etched with faint markings. "Recovered from a rebel courier 3 days ago," he explained. "Came straight out of Epsilon 9. I took the stone carefully, avoiding the carvings. Even through my gloves, I could sense something off about it, not openly corrupted, but close enough to feel wrong. I'll need privacy," I said, "and guards carrying null rods nearby." Lorik's brow furrowed. "Is that normal?" It's a precaution, I answered. What I'm about to do carries risks. His eyes narrowed. What kind of risks? I could have softened it, but lying would have done neither of us any good. When I opened my mind to see this place, I explained. I make a channel between here and there. Information flows both ways. If there are warp creatures or enemy psychers present, they might sense me, even try to follow me back. Lorik stared at me for a long moment, then turned to his officers. Clear the room of everyone except essential staff. Post 2 guards with null rods at each door. And find me a Sister of Silence. If there's one anywhere within 100 kilometers. It took an hour to prepare. When it was done, I sat alone in the center of the command room. Hastily painted wards glistened on the floor in blessed oil. The ore sample rested on a small table in front of me. 4 guards with null rods stood at the 4 corners of the room, faces grim behind their helmets. Only Lorik and a single Vox operator stayed inside, keeping their distance. I unfastened my null collar and felt my psychic senses rush back like a flood. The whispers at the edge of my perception grew louder and more insistent. I forced myself to focus, building mental walls to hold them at bay. Then I placed my hands on the ore and opened my inner sight. The connection formed instantly, stronger, sharper than I had expected. I was no longer sitting in the command room. My mind hurtled through a shifting tunnel of darkness, pulled along by unseen currents toward a place that became sharper and sharper with every moment. Epsilon 9 emerged before me, not as walls and machinery, but as a knot of raw power, a wound where reality itself had thinned. Warp and matter were bleeding together here. The mining complex pulsed like an open sore on the planet's surface. And through that wound, something was crawling. I forced myself to focus, to gather facts the captain could use. Troop numbers, defenses, weapons. But what I saw made my stomach lurch. The rebels were there, but they weren't fully human anymore. Flesh had merged with metal. New limbs sprouted from twisting torsos, and faces had stretched into monstrous parodies of themselves. They moved together with eerie precision, like puppets all tied to the same invisible strings. At the heart of the complex, where or had once been mined, they'd built something impossible, a tower or a spire, or perhaps both, fashioned from the fused bodies of still-living victims. It pulsed with a sick green glow that hurt to look at. And at its peak, something vast was forming, something ravenous. I tried to retreat, to snap the connection, but I was already too late. A vast, ancient will had noticed me. Its attention rolled over me like a tidal wave. It reached through the link I'd created, not with hands, but with thought, threads of pure malice slithering toward my mind, trying to drag me back to that tower. I threw up every shield I'd been taught, whispering prayers and mental wards, clinging to them like a lifeline. Somewhere far away, in the real world, I could hear myself screaming and feel hands pinning me down as my body convulsed. The thing laughed. The sound wasn't sound at all, but it still seemed to shake reality itself. It pressed images into my mind instead of words. I see you. I know you. I will have you. I felt my barriers breaking. My sense of self began to blur. And suddenly I understood how possession started, not as a violent takeover, but as a slow erasure of boundaries, until you could no longer tell where you ended and the intruder began. Desperate, I reached for the null rods I knew were near me in the physical world. I couldn't see them with my inner sight, couldn't touch them directly, but I knew where they were. I gathered the last of my will and shoved my mind toward that blessed emptiness. It hit like a blade through my skull. All psychic sense vanished. The link snapped. I slammed back into my body with such force that I bit through my tongue. Blood filled my mouth as I came back to myself on the floor of the command center. 2 guards held me down while a medici pressed a syringe into my arm. Captain Lorik stood over me, bolt pistol drawn and aimed squarely at my head. Status report, he barked. Are you in control, Psyker? I tried to speak, but choked on the blood. I spat it onto the deck and gave a weak nod. Confirm verbally, he ordered, the pistol steady. I am in control. I croaked at last, my tongue thick and clumsy. The link is broken. On myself. Lorik didn't lower his weapon immediately. His eyes stayed locked on mine, searching for any flicker of corruption. The medici swept an auspex over my body, checking for the telltale signs of warp infection. Readings within acceptable parameters, the medici said at last. High stress, but no contamination. Only then did Lorik holster his pistol. There was no apology, none was needed. "What did you see?" he asked, offering a hand to pull me upright. I told him everything. The warped rebels, the tower of living flesh, the thing at its summit, the psychic attack. His expression hardened with every detail. When I finished, he turned to the Vox operator.